And I talked to Mike about it, and Mike was like, look, man, I'm a writer, right? Like, I just write what I observe. And I'm telling you right now that, you guys can explode at any minute.
Welcome, everyone, to This Was The Scene, the podcast that takes a look back at the late 90s, early 2000 punk scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. Texas is the Reason was an American emo post-hardcore band founded by former Shelter guitarist Norman Brannon and 108 drummer Chris Daly in 1994. They disbanded in 97 and held brief reunions in 2006 and 2012 and 2013. In 97, on the eve of signing with Capitol Records, the band flew overseas for a European tour. Ongoing intra-band tensions arising from their major label Attention reached their apex. The night of the final stop of the tour in Bielefeld, Germany, Daly and Brannon agreed before the show that if the show was awesome, it would be their last. Brannon later related, I walked on stage and we opened with Antique, and when Garrett started singing, there were 800 Germans singing along with us. I looked at Daly and knew that this was over. Thank you, Wikipedia, for that write-up. Texas is the Reason was one of those bands that disbanded before I got a chance to ever see them until I went to go see them in 2006 for one of their reunion shows. I remember hearing about them through my buddy David Patino, who I've also interviewed on this podcast. They were one of those bands that people would just give you the album and say, you have to hear this. And then you listen to it and you're like, this is fucking something I've never heard before and it's amazing. And I should probably start writing music because I am now crap. My all-time favorite song by them is Do You Know Who You Are, which is weird because I do not like instrumentals, but this is the only instrumental I've ever loved. And the first time I heard it was, I think, on the third Lane Meyer tour. We were driving down I-95, and Dave Patino had just gotten in the band. I think he was listening to it, or he said, you should check this out. And I remember I just like put the headphones on and listened to it, and I was totally blown away. And I think I played that song on repeat like 1,000 times on that tour because it just pulled out some kind of emotion in me. And to this day, I have added this to so many playlists and just told people, like, you have to just hear this song because it's so fucking great. And it was pretty cool to tell Norm that in this interview because it was just like, thank you for writing this song because it's fucking amazing. And he was like, wow, that's really nice. So that was pretty cool. There's a lot of people in this podcast I never thought I was ever going to interview, and there's still people that I'm trying to interview that are saying yes, which is still blowing my mind. And this is definitely one of those interviews because it was really easy. All I did was message Norman on his Instagram account. I said, I have this podcast. It talks about the late 90s punk scene. Would you want to do an interview? And he was like, yes, I would totally love to do that. And this is what we talked about. The antimatter comp. What he wanted to find out when he interviewed people. Working for Keith from Cause for Alarm. Going to shows at CBGB's. Dealing with trauma, becoming a Hare Krishna, the song Do You Know Who You Are, which I just mentioned, how he got Garrett in the band, their reunion shows, bands getting paid good money for playing shows, the slideshow in 2006 at Irving Plaza, his amp blowing up at a reunion show, knowing that they were a possible time bomb at the very beginning, jets to Brazil, and a ton more. Real quick before we get into it, if you want to support the podcast, you could just go to thiswasthescene.com and there's a donate button. There's also a button in the navigation if you want to become a Patreon. It's $1 a month, which is basically equals to $12 a year, which is said many times about 3.5 cups of Starbucks coffee. Or it could be a sub at Subway with a bag of chips. Wait, maybe there'd be 2 subs at Subway. So you can skip the Subway sandwich. You can donate to the podcast. And you could also buy merch that helps keep this thing going. Or you don't have to do anything, and you could just keep listening to the podcast, and that would be great as well. Feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with anyone who would love some punk rock nostalgia. With that said, let's get started. You said you have a meeting at 2 now, or is it 1?
Oh, it got canceled, so I'm good.
All right, we're going to talk till 5 o'clock.
All right.
Actually, yeah, right before I got the call.
I don't think I'm that interesting, but we can try.
You know, a lot of people say that, and you'll start just kind of pulling little details out from the past that you're like, oh shit, I forgot about that. And it just becomes like super interesting. For me, it's really interesting because, you know, obviously it was a Texas the Reason fan, so I'm not going to like fanboy out or anything, but I was pretty stoked that you said yeah.
Well, I love doing this stuff personally.
Cool.
I used to be on the other side, and so I have very strong opinions about these conversations and how they sort of happen.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, so when I was doing antimatter in the early 90s, I had a sort of, I agenda, I guess. At the time, the fanzine culture and interview culture, it was a little bit, uh, it was about the music, right?
Yeah.
And at that time in the early 90s, I think that we were sort of branching out in different ways. The bands were changing sound. No two bands sounded alike. You had, a music festival that was called More Than Music. We were really starting to talk about things beyond just, the shows and the songs and the records. And it hadn't really fully absorbed into, I think, the interview culture at that time. And so, when I started Antimatter, I was kind of coming to grips with a lot of things about myself. I was coming to grips with past trauma. I was coming to grips with being gay. I was coming to grips with just sort of my trying to find my place in the world. A lot of stuff that's you would think someone who's 21 years old would be going through.
Yeah.
Maybe not everyone, but those things, at least specific to me. And so I wasn't in a place yet where I could articulate those things for myself. And so on some level, I used the interview platform as a way of sort of getting other people to say things that I wanted to say.
Interesting.
And so to me, that magazine is as much about me as it is about anyone else. Because I certainly was driving the conversations into places that I felt that I wanted to go, but maybe I didn't have the audacity to talk about myself yet.
I remember there being an Antimatter comp
Yeah.
with Revelation, right?
Yeah. No, it came out on Another Planet, which was basically Profile.
Okay.
So that was in 97
Yeah. Was there a connection there
with,
with you and that comp?
oh yeah, I put it together. It was
Oh,
a comp.
so glad I knew that. I
Yeah.
well, I remember that comp like because there's a Quicksand song on there, and it
Yeah.
opens it up, and it's by far my favorite Quicksand song ever. And I remember my buddy
Mine
Dave.
too.
Yeah, and that was like the only place you could find that song was on that comp, right?
Yeah. I mean, I knew that they had recorded it during Manic Compression, and I think it may have come out like on a radio promo CD or something at some point, but nobody had it. It was super rare. And so I asked for it, and I remember they were just like, it's not really one of our great
Oh
songs. And I
my
was like,
God,
you're
it's one of the
crazy.
best fucking songs they ever wrote.
So yeah, so I mean, they, to be fair, maybe a year or two ago, they put it back in their set list, and
Oh my God.
I was talking to Alan, and he's like, by the way, you were totally right.
Yeah.
So I was like, great, I feel vindicated. But yeah, so that comp was basically like the epitaph for the magazine. Like the magazine, went from 93 to 96 roughly. And at that time, Fred Feldman, who currently runs Triple Crown Records,
Yeah.
he was running this imprint through Profile, Another Planet. And so at the time, he was putting out a lot of like reissues and sort of almost K-Tel style comps of hardcore stuff. Like he had the Sunday Matinee comp that was like, all these classic hardcore bands, and he was reissuing records for Murphy's Law and Warzone and the Cro-Mags and Leeway. So, a lot of stuff was happening on that front, but he wanted to do something that really represented what was happening now. So or at least then, so he called me up and said, hey, I have this idea. I feel like there needs to be like a comp of what's happening now, and I feel like it needs to be based around your fanzine. And, would you be interested in doing it? And it was really weird because I've never considered it. And but as soon as he said it, I was like, yeah, absolutely. This needs to be documented. And I was mostly excited because I knew it was going to be a comp of bands that didn't sound anything like each other. And that's what hardcore was to me at the time. Hardcore was a community. Hardcore was ideas. It wasn't necessarily music anymore. I still liked all the bands, and I loved the fact that a lot of these bands had crossover in fans, even though, Split Lip doesn't sound like Quicksand and neither of them sound like Strife.
Yeah.
But it was something that I felt strongly about, that if hardcore was going to sort of survive, that it needed to sort of expand its parameters, because, as much as I love classic thrashy hardcore, it's not really something that I personally wanted to listen to all the time. The older I got.
You had to be in a certain mood.
Absolutely. And I still get in those moods.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But not as much as I did when I was 15.
Yeah, I remember when I first saw me and my friends, we grew up more on like the pop punk stuff, and then like as it progressed, it's like your friend kind of puts something on in their car, or they just give you a CD, like, you got to listen to this, and they're like, I think you'll like it, and it was a step outside of the realm of what we were used to, but it would be
Yeah.
it would open our eyes up to things, and that's how it bled into the post-hardcore stuff and the hardcore stuff. And I remember there was a Cinema Beer Goggles or Beer Nuts comp that came out from Hopeless, and it was, it was like MXPX and all these poppy bands, but then Strife was on there with, I forget the name of the song, but I think it was like song 7 on Bliss. I think it's song's Blister. I think that's it, Blistered. And it just starts, and they just go off, and me and my friends started watching it. We were like laughing in the beginning. We're like, what is this? But then by the end of the video, we're like, this is one of the greatest fucking things I've ever seen. And we went out and got in this Defiance, and it was amazing.
I think hardcore, it either affects you deeply or you sort of just miss it. And like, there's no sort of in between, because even people who come into the scene and, hang out for a little while, who's there, who's real, like who's going to be, sticking around. Like, there's something about it that's visceral. And also, I've said this before, and I think it's a valid point, and I won't, make any assumptions about you, or ask you to share anything about your life, but
no, please do.
I've said to people before, when, back in the day, like when I first started hanging out, one of the things that really, I connected with, in terms of hardcore kids, was that I felt like we were all kind of coming from these, dysfunctional situations in different ways. And it didn't matter whether they were street kids or suburban kids. Like, if you were listening to hardcore at a certain period of time, you were there because something fucked you up.
Yeah.
And so it used to be, it wasn't a joke. I would meet new people, and like within like 10 minutes of meeting somebody, I would say, like, so what fucked you up to be here? And and there was always an answer. There was always an answer, and it was always a good answer. And even like, I think about Snapcase, right? Like, so in the mid 90s, Snapcase were one of the biggest bands out. It's so much so that it was like a joke with my band, with Texas. We would say things like, are we bigger than Snapcase yet? Like, that was sort of the joke.
Wow.
So like Snapcase were like, they were big. And when they first started coming around, before they got really, really big, I think they had this weird reputation for being like jocks and like, just normal people, basically. At least around my circles, a lot of people sort of felt that way about them. And they put out the Steps EP. I remember that came out. And something about that EP sort of, my spidey senses tingled, right? Like, I felt like there's more to this band than what people say. I don't think they're a bunch of jocks. I don't know who they are. I don't know their deal. I want to find out. At the time, I was doing Antimatter. And so I decided that I wanted to interview them. And every issue of the zine, I would have one band where I would interview every member separately. And so they were the band that I chose to do that with. And so I, without knowing them at all, I just was like, let's set it up. I'll come up to Buffalo. We'll hang out for like a weekend and we'll do it. And they were like, great. They were stoked. So I took a bus up to Buffalo. I hang out with them. And on its face, at first I was like, well, they're really nice. I definitely don't think they're jocks. Like they're just nice guys. They maybe have like stronger jaw lines than a lot of hardcore kids. They're very handsome. But like, I didn't think they were a bunch of meatheads at all by any stretch, just within the first like bunch of hours of hanging out with them. And then I started interviewing them one by one. And I didn't ask that in those words, but essentially that was the crux of what that interview was for me. Like, it was like, I need to know what fucked you guys up or how fucked up you really are. Because you're here, so I know you're fucked up.
Did you kind of make that like, did that make it simple for you to interview people? Because if you have that one, it's like a company that has a clear defined mission. They can answer. It's like that just will carve the path out for them for what they need to do, right? So for you, with having that as
Yeah.
your one question, that almost seemed like it was this that the core or the epicenter of you trying to get to that where so many questions would come out of it easily.
Right. I mean, so it's funny because I've never asked that question literally, right? But I feel like if you ask the right questions, people start telling you what's wrong. And some people just sort of come out the gate. I remember sitting down with Richie from Into Another. I used to do a lot of interviews at this tofuti shop on Bleecker Street. I love tofuti. And and Richie sat down and I turned the tape recorder on and I was like, "So where are you coming from?" And he was like, "Oh, therapy."
Oh
And I was
wow,
like, "Great, let's talk about that."
nice.
Um, so it was a little easier with other people, and sometimes you had to use different techniques. So like when I didn't have that much time, I always tried to make it so that I had a lot of time with somebody. Like I would tell people like clear a few hours, let's just hang out. But you didn't always get that luxury. So the first time I met Jay Robbins from Jawbox, I was interviewing him, and we had a set amount of time. They just finished sound checking. They were playing at CBGB. We went next door to the gallery, sat down there, and I knew I only had like 45 minutes or something. So I was like, I got to do something that freaks him out to sort of break that ice quickly. So we sat down. I put the tape recorder down. I pressed record, and I said, "Tell me about your first crush." And he just looked at me like, "Who the fuck are you?" And he was like, I mean, like it got really weird really fast, exactly the way it should be. And if you read that interview, there's just like this really great tension throughout the whole thing. Like, and there's a point in the middle of the interview where he's just like, "Look, I don't even know what to make of this, man. Like, you just came out of me with this question, and I don't, I'm trying to answer these things, but it was really like it got tense." But at the end of that, I felt we had a really interesting conversation, and we became lifelong friends. Like, obviously, he, later produced the Texas
Yeah.
record, and and I'd done things when the Antimatter book came out in 2008. I held 2 benefit concerts for to help with the health care of his kid, who was going through some issues, and things like that. I mean, I just hung out with him when Jawbox came through in New York. So that's this type of stuff that I feel like these conversations can engender
Yeah.
if we allow them to.
My normal conversation with people before I started doing this is that I work for myself just like you do, and I had to do a lot of networking. So I'm from New Jersey originally, and I was living in Morristown about 5 years ago, and I was doing a lot of networking. I went to the Morris County Chamber of Commerce, and there'd be 200 people in a room in suits, and I walked in with just like khaki pants and just like a collared shirt because I didn't give
Business
it.
cash.
Yeah, I was because I was also the youngest person in the room, and at the time I was like 34, 35, and everyone else is like mid 40s into their 60s. And I did a lot of coffees with people, but we'd sit down and I'm like, can we just not fucking talk about business? I'm like, how's life? And it was
Right.
the same thing. They would just be caught off guard. They have that wall up first. I'm like, but I just love getting people to talk about something, and you can learn because like when you pass someone on the street, they just look like just some whatever person. just everyone else. But if you ask them one question, everyone has this amazing story or something going on that you're like, that's wild. And I love getting to that with
Right.
people.
And I'll also say, like, this word networking has always sort of drove me crazy because it implies a sense of artifice that is unnecessary. Like, if someone actually interviewed me not too long ago and asked me if I could give, any advice to an up and coming band or, artist in the scene or something, like, what would it be, to help them get off the ground? And I just was like, be nice.
Yeah.
Like, literally everything that's ever happened to me of any value happened to me because I was nice to someone and they remembered me and they liked me. And, and I think about Texas is the Reason, like, people, it's easy to be like, oh, you guys just came out of nowhere. Like, you were immediately on Revelation, you had major label offers after your first show. That's all true, but that's not because we were a great band. That's because, like, I knew a lot of people and I was nice to them. Because there are a lot of great bands who don't happen, so to speak.
Well, do you also think that happened because you came from Shelter, Chris came from 108, and
Right.
so you did your due diligence prior to that. Like I just did a Midtown an interview with my buddy Rob, who was in this band Midtown, and we were discussing about they left all these bands, they were in these Jersey bands, started their band, but they waited to record something and then came out their first show with record labels wanting them, but no one really realized that prior to that, the other people were in bands and they had made connections and were already building that. So when they started the new thing, they're like, yeah, of course
Well, yeah,
we're gonna
but
fucking do it this way because the other way it takes too long.
I don't even look at it like that because for example, with Shelter, Shelter was an amazing learning experience. And I always credit Ray Capo with being someone who has really sort of deeply influenced the way I do business, which is, both in the negative and positive sense. And he'll tell you that he's made mistakes. but, but when I was on tour so I was in Shelter for about a year and a half, and we did a lot of touring. I went all over the world with those guys. And you could say that as I was doing this, that I was quote unquote networking, because I did everywhere we went. I made it a point to meet people who were doing stuff in that town. Who's the promoter? Who are the kids with the fan scenes? Who did the record labels? Who were the bands, the local bands? I wanted to meet them all, but it wasn't artificial. I wasn't trying to, like, meet you all because I've got this plan to be, start my band in about a year and a half. And you guys are all going to come in very handy when I do. I started authentic relationships with a lot of people. And whether or not Texas is the Reason ever happened, I would have maintained those friendships and relationships with those people because I genuinely liked them and I genuinely believed what they were doing. And I think when that's the place that you're coming from, that's what you'll get back.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's like when I mentioned networking, that's what they would call it. It would be a networking event, and I'm the same way. I was like, you know what?
Yeah.
I don't want to.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm like, you're gonna smell bullshit if I'm here going, hey, that's great. By the way, can you buy this, or do you know people who can buy this? I was like, why don't we not talk about business? Like, why don't I know
Well,
you as a
there's
person?
there's no amount of sort of help that you could give me that would make me suffer you if you were a fool. Um, so at the end of the day, I have to want to be around you, even if we're going to quote unquote do things together or work, have some sort of working relationship. I need to care about you a little bit. And so that's all I'm looking for, honestly. And I'm sort of still like that. I'm not hawking any products right now. I'm not planning for some sort of, major takeover. I just like meeting new people and getting to know their stories. And then if at some point in the future it makes sense for our paths to cross in other ways, I'm stoked for that.
Is that why you got into real estate?
Well, actually, that's funny. So I started real estate largely because so the person who owns the company that I work with is Keith Burkhart, who was the singer for Cause for Alarm. Who, I don't know how hardcore you are, but in the early 80s, Cause for Alarm were like, one of the first and seminal New York hardcore bands. And they were sort of a band where when I got into the hardcore scene, it was like late 86, early 87 is sort of when I started really listening to the music. Cause for Alarm is sort of like one of the bands that goes in your hardcore starter kit, right? Like, especially in New York, you get Cause for Alarm, you get Antidote, you get The Mob, you got Kraut, Reagan Youth, so all these different bands. And so Cause for Alarm were on my radar from almost day one of my experience in the scene. And they became one of my favorite bands. And they played a reunion show at the Ritz, I want to say in 1988. I think Youth of Today were on the bill too. It was like a big kind of mega band show. And I was so psyched. I remember just I had a Cause for Alarm shirt and I'd wear it all the time. I was really into it. And then again, when I started the magazine, they got back together and started putting out records. So I was like, oh, I'm just going to interview them. So I sat down with Keith. We spoke. We did an interview for the zine, and then we became friends. And I moved in with him. We became roommates a year later, which was totally holy shit! I live with the singer from Cause for Alarm. It's amazing. But he had actually started doing real estate in the '80s. Him and Harley Flanagan's girlfriend, I guess, both took real estate classes when they were young punk kids because they were just they were basically to do real estate in New York, you just have to be licensed. And to be licensed, you have to take some classes and take a couple of tests. It's not like there's a huge bar of entry. And when you're a punk kid, people aren't really lining around or lining up to give you jobs, right? And you probably don't have a resume even. In real estate, you don't need that because ultimately you're your own business. So you just need to park your license at a brokerage. And most brokerages will be like, okay, good, give it your best shot, go for it. They don't need to know that you're amazing right off the bat, that you don't need to have some sort of specialized experience. You just need the license and you need to convince them to give you a shot. So, he did that because he was no one else was going to hire me. I was just random skinhead from New Jersey. So, so he got into the business. He became very successful, stayed in the business all these years. And then in 2008, started his own company. And about 5 years ago, I started working with him. And it's been great, working with your friend. He has an amazing model. He's not, a hungry, crazy capitalist. We all make decent livings and we all have a certain amount of freedom that is amazing. And he's definitely given me a gift in that sense.
Do you guys ever go out to any bars and go to hardcore shows or sit around and listen to, is there music involved at all in the dialogue between you guys?
Occasionally we'll talk about the old days, or if I see something recently there was a picture that was going around Instagram of a kid who couldn't have been more than 10 years old, at CBGB's in a Cause for Alarm shirt, back in the day. This was at least 1986, 87. And we were talking about that because one, we were trying to figure out who is that kid. And two, I was sort of pissed because I was like, man, how did that kid get in without any problems? And I would just get kicked out all the time. It was a total crapshoot as to whether or not I was getting into CB's that week. It was do they like me this week, or did they decide, no, fuck you, you're a kid, get out of here? So
So this is actually a good segue because I usually structure this going back in time and talk about how you got into music, and then it leads into the band and cool stories, and then the breakup. That's the very just top level, and then just dive into just random parts here and there. So you kind of just set it off right there. What actually got you into, how old were you when you started going into hardcore shows? What got you into it?
I want to say okay. All right. So there's a few points of entry where I sort of knew about hardcore even before I knew what hardcore was. So one was in fourth grade. I grew up in Queens in New York. And my fourth grade teacher, her name was Miss Cons, and then she got married in the middle of the year and changed her name to Miss Kohler. And so she was like, I had such a crush on her. She was my favorite teacher in the world. I just wanted to be her. Like, I was obsessed with her. She was young and cool, and I just felt like she cared about me. And, I alluded to my dysfunctional family in the past. Let's just say I didn't feel like I had anyone who cared about me. So my relationship with her was just super strong, a very seminal relationship as a kid. So for all of my life, I've been into music. That's been like the number one thing of my life. I listened to the radio 24 hours a day as a kid. I had a transistor radio, and I would hide it under my pillowcase at night and listen to the radio through the pillow. Like, no one else could hear it except me. That was how obsessed I was with music. I knew I wanted to play music, and at first I wanted to play drums. So one day in class, I was drawing, because I used to love to draw band logos, and in fourth grade I was really into heavy metal because that's what my older brother was into. And so Ms. Cons said to me, have you ever thought about playing music? And I was like, yeah, totally. I want to play the drums. And so she said, oh, that's amazing. My brother plays drums. Maybe, you guys can get together sometime. He can show you how to do stuff. And I was like, oh my God, that'd be amazing. And, and she's like, he's in a band. They're really cool. And she actually gave me a tape of his band, and his band was Kraut, which is insane. So her brother was Johnny Feedback Cons. And I was just like, and so, okay, I'm not going to front. I was in fourth grade. I heard it. I didn't like it.
Yeah.
It hadn't hit me yet, right?
This
like,
isn't
I was
Def
just sort of
Leppard.
like, right, exactly. Like I was into Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Kiss, like that kind of stuff. Kraut was hard and heavy, but it was like not that. That said, I was like, that would be amazing. Anyway, nothing ever happened. I never got to play drums with Johnny Feedback. That would have been amazing. But a few years later, my older brother, decides that he's going to get into punk for like what I describe as like a week. Because that's literally my only memory of him even being interested in punk, was maybe for like a week. And I remember like he went to go see Sham 69 at CB's. He made a couple of punk friends. He made a skinhead friend. These guys started hanging out. My brother's 4 years older than me. As a lot of younger brothers go, like we sort of mature quicker, I think, because we're always trying to keep up with our older brother and his friends.
Yeah.
And anyway, his friends were like infinitely interesting to me. He had this one friend who, I remember he drove a car, which obviously if you live in New York, that's like rare. He had a tape box in his car. So one day they were hanging out, and I asked his friend, like, hey, would you mind if I took your tape box and just dubbed a bunch of stuff? And he was like, yeah, go ahead. So I took that stuff in, and I just started taping all his tapes. And I remember like, that was the first time I heard like Stiff Little Fingers, Blitz, Discharge, a lot of punk stuff, Peter and the Test Tube Babies, Misfits, so stuff like that. And I was into it. I was like, for some reason, it was starting to connect. At that point also, we had a record store that was close by, and I remember I started looking at Maximum Rock and Roll, started like picking up stuff like that. And then the real game changer for me was in 1986, I discovered Crucial Chaos, which was a radio show on WNYU. And it was every Thursday night from 9 to 10:30. And I listened to it religiously. And as someone who like loved radio from birth, this was like a dream. Like I couldn't believe it. I remember the first episode I listened to, they started with the Butthole Surfers theme song. I remember Doggy Style, they played that. Murphy's Law was the first time I heard them. So it was like a lot of stuff that I started taping the show every week and just really getting into it. By the end of 86, I want to say, my parents moved to Long Island. At that point, I was in junior high school. And I remember I was drawing, and here I was again, drawing logos on my books. I guess that doesn't change. So I was sort of into art as a kid. So the drawing I was drawing on my book was the Crumbsuckers logo. Life of Dreams had just come out, and I was obsessed with the lettering of the Crumbsuckers and the way it sort of like fell into crumbs. And I was just like, trying to approximate it in my notebook. And this kid in my homeroom walks past me and looks down at my desk, and he's like, "Holy shit, you like the Crumbsuckers?" And I was like, "Yeah, I love them. Why?" And he's like, "My cousin plays guitar." So I was like, "Fuck, that's amazing." And so I became friends with him. And then sure enough, the Crumbsuckers were playing at Sundance, which was this club on Long Island. And they happened to be playing two shows. One was an all ages show. One was like, I think 18 plus at the time. So I wasn't old enough to do the second show, but I was all ages. So that was my first show. I went to go see the Crumbsuckers at Sundance. And I think it was like pretty much like that experience that you described with Strife of just looking at it and being like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. Like having listened to so much punk and sort of like looking at it from the abstract and then walking into that club and seeing it was just like, this is it. This is my life. I'm here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I remember like that first time walking into somewhere, like you would hear about it, and so you'd kind of just build it in your head of what it would be like. But when you walk in, it became just something so much different and bigger to you.
Absolutely. And when you're as young as I was, everyone else just seemed like it felt like I might as well have been hanging out with like 50-year-old people.
Yeah.
Everybody was so much older and cooler, and it was more mysterious and like, whoa, what am I doing here? I'm sure my memory of the whole time is probably really tweaked because of that. Now I think about a lot of these people that I looked up to back then. I'm like, oh, you're like only like 4 or 5 years older than me. Like, actually, we're not that different. So
wait, how old were you?
But
how old were you though when you went to that show?
13, I think.
See, like I remember. So when I went to the first shows that I went to, they're not that like I was like intimidated or I was nervous about it because that was like the era when the whole moshing and shit was going on. So I thought I'd be in the crowd and get my ass handed to me. And so I'd walk in, there was just like this nervousness. But looking back, it was very light shows. You went to shows where shit was the shit that I was hearing about later on, where it was more intense.
It was, and that was part of the experience, right? Like I always talk about that fear that I used to have when I would get up out of the subway and start walking to CB's. It wasn't just CB's. When you think about CB's, yeah, okay, you walk into CB's and people are crazy and there's tons of skinheads, blah, blah, blah. But it was also the fact that, at least in the late 80s, no one was in the East Village or on the Lower East Side that wasn't a criminal, a gang member.
Yeah, shit was legit.
A punk, or just someone who's been there for 100 years. So it was, so that part alone, if you just dropped me off into that neighborhood, I would have been scared. Now I'm like, you drop me off in this neighborhood and I'm about to go into this place with a bunch of people that could potentially kick my ass if I do the wrong thing. So one thing I will say was that I was lucky because of the people that my brother met during the week that he decided he was into punk. One of them was a skinhead kid who was a few years older than me, had been around, and kind of facilitated my entry, especially in New York. He knew a lot of the people, a lot of the players. I at least felt like there was a group of people looking out for me, and like I never got fucked with. No one ever stole my docs or anything like that.
Did you like going to the shows? Did you find the more you went, the more you just felt like it was less intimidating and you just felt that it was like your second home?
I mean, I felt like it was my first home.
I was literally gonna reword that as I said that. Yeah.
No, I mean, absolutely. Look, to a certain extent, my entire life has been looking for family and looking for a sense of security and home. And I definitely felt like, at least at that time, hardcore provided a sense of stability for me, which sounds crazy to say.
No, it makes so much sense. It makes complete
well,
sense.
I mean, it sounds crazy when you think about like go on YouTube and just look up the hardcore episode of Donahue or whatever, like even the Geraldo Skinhead episode from 1988. That's what I'm calling stability. It was a bunch of street kids, but we provided something for each other that we weren't getting at home.
Yeah, but
That's all I can say.
when you're all broken, like this, the thing you kept saying you were trying to find in people, it's like, what's the thing that broke you? And everyone has that. And when the people say they don't, that's when they're really fucked up. And
Well,
it
some people don't. I will tell you that. I do think some people don't.
that makes me nervous. They're like too nice. I'm like, what are you hiding? What's in your basement?
There, there's a couple of reasons for that. I mean, one is that some people have really just been lucky in life and have had, amazing families who provided them with all the safety and security and love and sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs that they needed. And that's amazing. Like when I meet people like that, I'm literally just dumbfounded and just appreciative that that exists in the world,
Yeah.
and that some people get to experience that. And there's another type of person like that who just has zero self-awareness. Those people I'm a little bit scared of.
Yeah, that's the
People
coverage.
like, no, nothing's wrong.
Everything's
But
great.
not because they're hiding, but because they don't think about themselves deeply enough to understand, oh, that's what's going on.
Yeah, it's like when you try, that's the thing. It's like when we were talking before about how you can ask certain people that question, and if they don't open up, or you can kind of see that they're brushing it off. It's like these Instagram people when they have, it's like, here's my best life all the time, and then you talk to them behind the scenes, they just tell you how miserable they are, or they're just, it's like they're trying to be too shiny.
But to be fair, like I don't like to necessarily get super negative on social media. Like if I posted about every bout of depression I've ever had, everyone would stop following me. uh, but at the same time, right? Like I've had people off social media who have basically said that to me in real life. There's a sense of, like, I will say, like, so, when there's a sense of support, no matter where you get it, it's important. If there are people who feel like they need to vent in that way in social media because it's providing them with some level of support, then I certainly don't want to discourage that. And I think that to a certain extent, like everything that you know about me, or that every piece of work that I've put out into the world, honestly, is imbued with the fact that, hey, I have experienced severe chronic depression pretty much my entire life. I have PTSD. And hooray, here's some art.
And hooray. Do you think, like, when you were going to shows though, like, as you said you suffered with that, did you find that turned off when you were at a show?
It didn't turn off, but it sort of allowed me to commune, with people who didn't believe that you needed to be all right about everything. I think, like, when you're growing up in sort of like the normal channels of high school and whatnot, like I remember they used to sort of force me to go to my high school therapist. At one point, I think that they actually called me in and called my mother in because they were concerned that I was about to kill myself. Look, I've had suicidal ideation before in my life. That wasn't one of the times. I don't know where that came from, but maybe that's it, right? Like they were so not used to seeing people just being honest about their feelings that they felt like the fact that I could do that meant that I was in trouble.
Interesting.
And I feel like it was just the opposite. The fact that I could do that is the way that I cope. The fact that I can share those things means that I have some level of control over it.
Yeah.
The minute I stop sharing is when you should call the therapist.
Well, if you're bottling it up, it's like you feel like you're gonna fucking explode, and it's way worse.
And you will.
Yeah.
And you will, definitely.
Yeah, I had a buddy who went to Iraq in Bush era, like when we went in over there, and he was like the front line, and he came back, and he was like, "Look, he's like, I'm gonna tell everybody everything, because the last thing I need is to have that shit inside my head, and I'm gonna go fucking insane." So even like that extremity, just shit. I mean, it's a weird comparison, but I mean, when you have something that's like just intense and you need a release, if you don't do that, you are gonna go fucking crazy, and you are gonna like just jump into fucking traffic or do something really awful.
So what I've realized is that that's not actually a crazy comparison at all. I actually just last month finished reading this book that kind of changed my perspective about everything, called The Body Meets the Score, or The Body Keeps the Score. It's basically talking about how trauma victims in different ways, that he definitely dealt with veterans and sort of wartime survivors of abuse of different sorts, sexual abuse, violent physical abuse, so on and so forth. And then other sort of like random traumas of the world, like being in car accidents or, other things like that, natural disasters. And essentially what the sort of thesis of the book is about is talking about how trauma sort of like embeds itself in your body. We often think of, especially now, we're thinking about mental health a lot, right? Everyone's talking about taking care of your mental health as well as your physical health.
Yeah.
But that's creating this sort of false divide that I think only in the last bunch of years, honestly, I've really sort of understood and really sort of started to work with in my own life, which is the sense that there is no divide. We have really gone out of our way to show that the mind is different than the body, but it's not. They're all organized together. They don't exist without the other. It's one thing. This goes back to even sort of the religious stuff and sort of like my period as a Hare Krishna and like, this severe divide between soul and body, right? Like we're constantly doing that to ourselves. And what we're doing is here's the interesting thing, this word. And as I say it, I've never said this before, and this is making sense. We're sort of disintegrating ourselves. What I'm saying by that is I'm using this word integration, because integration is about wholeness. Integrity, that comes from the same word, is about wholeness. Integrity means that you're operating from a place of consistency in everything that you do. And that consistency can only exist when you're looking at things holistically. If you're separating your body from your mind, then you're allowing yourself to do things on two different platforms as if they have no effect on each other. The fact is that trauma is a physical ailment. Trauma survivors, they suffer more from physical sicknesses than non-trauma survivors. It's not just depression and anxiety. It's other ailments. It's things that doctors are like, I don't know what to do. It doesn't seem like I actually have a friend who the doctors were convinced had an autoimmune disorder. It actually turned out to be more psychological, but it was affecting his body in such a way that the doctors couldn't even identify it as separate from that. This is like a real thing. And so that comparison actually is completely on point. I'm not going to say that I have the same experience as someone who's been to Iraq, but I can say that the way that trauma has affected me and my mind and my body, we'll probably be able to share some notes.
Yeah, like in December, I was ridiculously tired, and I go to a doctor, and I was like, I'm like really tired, and all this crazy shit's coming up, and they're like, nothing's wrong with you. Like they're like, we do all the physical things, like there's nothing wrong, and as the month progressed and it ended, and I did some physical tests, and like they were like, you should get this checked out, and it was fine. But then as the storm cleared, my mind cleared, and I just felt fine again. And it's amazing of how aware I've been lately about how much my mind is really fucking with my body,
Right.
with anxiety or like panic attacks and things like that because of certain traumas like I've gone through like the last 5 years. Yeah, you're right. It is wild how that.
Well, here's a perfect example. When I was young, I had inexplicable migraine headaches from the age of 4 to probably the age of 16. I literally would have to stay home from school once a week because the headaches were so debilitating. I would be screaming, I would be crying, I would be running to the bathroom and throwing up. It was like the most intense pain that you could ever put on a child. I mean, even as an adult, I still get the occasional migraine, and it's like, holy shit, how did I survive this as a kid? Like, this was insane. And it literally was at least once a week, sometimes more. We would go to the doctor, but it was like sort of like, well, migraines are hereditary, or, they're this, they're that. Take 2 aspirin, like whatever it is that they were telling you. There was no real treatment for it. Eventually, the migraine stopped just out of nowhere. I said, like, it was 16. At the time I thought, oh, great, cool. And I just kept going. And then, several years later, I'm like, oh, so was it a coincidence that the migraine stopped the second I left home?
Interesting.
Like literally.
Yeah, it's like you pulled out whatever's fucking with your mind. Yeah, it's gonna trickle down.
And that's, I moved out of my house when I was 16 years old, and I get an occasional migraine, but not to the regularity and not to the severity that I had as a child.
So I kind of want to connect this part here with 16, because what age were you? And it's like I hate making this jump, but it's like because this is fascinating to me, and I could talk about this all day. But I really want to and I want to, but I do want to talk about like the bands and things. But so like
we don't have to.
Everyone's like, we can't hear it, but we're expecting text of the reason. These guys talked about mental health for 3 hours, but it was fascinating.
We've heard they know all the band stories.
Yeah, they know. Like, just go Google them. You could read all this online somewhere.
It exists.
But like, did you
Wikipedia.com? No.
Yeah, I'm on it for my notes right now. I'm on that. I'm on the Goodreads for Antimatter. I'm on Revelation's website. I'm on your website. Yeah, it's a lot of info here, so people go check it out. At that time, are you still Hare Krishna, or like did you leave that behind back then?
When I was 16?
Yeah, like
that's sort of when
did you get into
I sort of
it?
Jumped in.
Yeah, okay, because I mean that's where I'm saying, like, it seems like you needed this release or this break from what all the shit was going on, and then you found it and around this time and left home. So that's interesting that this kind of transitioned to like that point.
Right. Like, so basically there was some point when I was 15 so in high school I used to like sit in the library during my lunch period because I didn't have any friends, and I just, was like, I'm just going to read. And so I would just research things that were interesting to me. And one of the things that I started reading about was the Hare Krishnas. There were a lot of academic books at the time. There was one book in particular that I remember called The Dark Lord by Larry Shin. And it was, he's an academic, so it was kind of not skewed any which way. It wasn't like, this is a dangerous cult, and it wasn't like, join this movement. It was somewhere in between. And I remember like the one thing that really stood out to me was there was a typical schedule of a Hare Krishna monk. I was so into this idea of waking up at 3:30 in the morning and meditating for 2 hours. And like, for some reason, that just sounded like the most idyllic, peaceful life and the opposite of what I had. That schedule just imprinted into my mind. I was really just obsessed with it. I just thought like that would be happiness to me. Another thing that I would do is I would read about law and sort of like different things like that. It's just something I was interested in. And I started reading about how I could legally leave home at 16, like they couldn't do anything anymore. So I started planning ahead. I was really sort of like, this might be the thing. I might need to do this. This was happening at about the same time. I was friends with Ray Cappo at this point. I remember we were talking on the phone, and I said like, yeah, so I'm thinking of dropping out of school and moving out of my house, but I don't really have a backup, and I'm trying to figure out what to do. And, Ray Cappo, in all his infinite wisdom, was like, yeah, man, drop out. He's like, do it. Yeah. So like,
it's like something I would tell someone. I'm like, fuck yeah, it sounds amazing.
Well, I mean, look, I get it. I think, there were a lot of kids my age in the scene who had dropped out, or older kids who had dropped out and were reasonably doing well. I think there was no reason for him to believe that anything bad was going to happen if I dropped out. And at the same time, he knew how miserable I was. And so, I don't totally blame him. And we joked about it like last year. I was like, I said to him, I was like, my entire life I can start it at that conversation. Like when you were telling me like drop out of school, like that move sort of directed everything that came after it.
Wow.
So, that was that. So I dropped out, and what I wound up doing was so I had been in a band at that point called Fountainhead. So Fountainhead was me, the singer was this guy, Bill Kiernan. The bassist was Scott from Texas Is the Reason. The other guitar player was Chris Trainer, who was later in Orange 9mm, Helmet, and is now in Bush. The drummer was this guy, Taylor McClam, who also was later in Orange 9mm. Bill was also sort of into the Christian thing at the time. And so he was living in Philadelphia at the temple there. And he was like, look, man, if you're going to drop out, you should come to Philadelphia. I was like, okay. So I did that. And I moved to the Krishna temple in Philadelphia. And I hung out there for a few months and then was sort of just like, I don't want to live in Philadelphia. So I came back and lived in the Krishna temple in Brooklyn, and I spent some time there.
What was that life like?
Well, I would say that it was sort of what I needed and sort of what I wanted, and then sort of not what I wanted. So there was like the part of it that was what I needed, I think, was sort of like the discipline, the regimented schedule of it all. Like I love that still. The sort of like introspection and peacefulness of sort of the monastic life, I think really appealed to me, even as a young person. I made some really close friends. In the Brooklyn Temple specifically, there was a devotee there named Mark, who was like an ex-skinhead. He actually had the word skins tattooed on the back of his head. And he was like my roommate, just a beautiful, beautiful person. Like he really made me feel like there was hope for me, like in terms of like not being an angry person for the rest of my life, because he was coming from that same place. And, he was like an early 80s skinhead in the New York scene, sleeve tattoos, honestly covered from head to toe, really, but also the most gentle, beautiful person. I saw him as sort of like what I wanted out of my life. Like I wanted to be as calm and kind and peaceful as him. I thought there's got to be something to this. What I didn't really love so much was probably the authoritarianism of it all. The Hare Krishna movement is a guru disciple lineage. There's a strict sort of like authority sort of, or there are authorities at every level, right? And I get why it's there. Authorities in religious movements are there often to sort of preserve and maintain the integrity of the practice and the integrity of sort of the community. So there are rules that you have to follow, and there are ways of being. I think at that time I was still probably a little too young to appreciate that. I kind of was getting into that zone of like, don't tell me what to fucking do. Not that I'd say it out loud, but that's how I was feeling. And that was maybe like a year and a half of doing that. And then I met Rob Fish. Rob had been hanging around the Hare Krishna movement for a while. I'd known of Rob from going to the Anthrax in Connecticut in the late 80s and early 90s. That was the best hardcore club ever, in my opinion. Every show I saw there was fucking amazing. And Rob would always be there, and he'd always be like sort of kneeled over on the side of the stage. And my friends didn't seem to like him. They always called him Dick Rob Release. And I'm sort of like, okay. So, and then one day I just met Dick Rob Release, and he wasn't a dick. He was the nicest guy. We, again, just immediately became like super tight, super fast. I started talking to him on the phone like every day for months. When I finally got to that place where I just was like, yeah, I don't know, if I'm going to be able to be a monk that much longer. He just was like, yeah, he's like, move in with me and my dad. I was like, don't you have to ask your dad? And he was just like, no, he's cool. And sure enough, his dad was cool. I just showed up and he was just like, hey, what's up? So that was in Edison, New Jersey. And then that's sort of where the next level started. Rob was in a band called Resurrection. I wound up joining Resurrection, and we went on tour in the summer of 92, Resurrection in Lifetime. It was like our first ever, all of our, like everybody in both bands, it was our first tour. That was also where I met Chris Daly from Texas Is the Reason. Chris played drums in Resurrection. That was, I think that was all connected and sort of, again, like it all boils down to those people in your life who, you meet these people, and if you let them change your life, they will.
It's amazing you said that at 16 you talked to Ray and he just gave you this simple advice, and everyone, when they ask people advice, they're just asking them for their permission because they don't want to give it to themselves. And
right.
in that point, it's like you just jumped off, and because you were like, I am gonna explode, I need to get out of the situation. You did, and it took you down this crazy path from just all the things you've done since then. And I think that a lot of people are, and like, yeah, you're gonna find moments in life where you're gonna come back and you're gonna be lost again because you're like, fuck, I was on this wave and I was doing everything I wanted to do, and then it stopped. You're like, but I thought that was gonna be the thing. But
Yeah.
then if you're a person who keeps looking, it's gonna put you on a new path. And I've done this so many times, but I've realized there's moments where I know I should do something and it's as clear as day, but I fight against it. But once I do it, it's like I can breathe and it feels so much lighter, and it's like I feel so fucking free. So it's amazing at like 16 was the beginning of you doing that, and then it just led you down this crazy path where
I think that we have this idea that we're all supposed to only do one thing in our life. You watch any of these like TV competition shows and like everyone's just like, I was meant to do this. I was born to sing. I was, born to dance, or whatever it is that they do, at the risk of using a word that's been overused and sort of abused. But I think that's a toxic way of thinking about your life. What does that mean for the dancer who gets into an accident and, can't walk? Does that mean just kill yourself? Like, is your life over? It doesn't have to be that way. And I think I realized that early. I would probably say I knew that when I was being in bands, for example. I knew so many people who, they were just like, being in a band, that's my life. That's all I know how to do. It's either this or jail. It's the big thing people say. And I was like, no, fuck that. Like, I'm good. I could do a lot of things. And even when I was in bands, I was doing other things. I started doing the magazine. I started writing for other magazines. I started, I was still working. I worked at a publishing company. Like, I was just like, I'm not going to just do one thing, because like, if that one thing doesn't work out, I'm fucked. And I have no one else to lean on. When I left home, I never got anything from my parents again. I've been independent, completely independent and financially independent since I was 16 years old. I couldn't afford, like, to say like, that's the only thing I can do. That's a fucking privilege. And I didn't have the luxury of that. The bands did great. We made money, but I still wasn't like satisfied. Like, I was just like, I don't care. That shit can fall apart any minute.
yeah.
And I
It's
also
true.
knew, back then, like, I was like, this style of music's great, but this isn't going to lead me into a career trajectory where I become Bob Dylan and I'm 65 years old, still playing, shows and making records. Like, it's just not going to happen. So I either need to like literally make this band the biggest band in the world, which no one can do. No one has the power to make the band that. Or I have to be practical about my life and make sure that I'm doing a number of things that I can continue to do. And that, honestly, I think that's healthy. I feel like having more than one interest is good. And over the
Yeah.
years, I've done that. I often joke that, my career title is following my muse. I do whatever feels good at the time.
Well, it's also freeing if you can just listen to yourself, and because the only thing that's going to stress you out is yourself,
Yeah.
right? It's like whatever you're saying in your head. So when these guys are saying, or these people are saying, "Oh, all I have is music, or I go to jail," that's reality to them because they're saying that they believe it. They said, "I have this for now, but I can do this other thing." It's like they're just when you establish that in your head, and that's what you're saying, that just becomes
But
what
it
you do.
also goes against sort of like my idea that I just think people in general, and a lot of people that I love, don't think highly of themselves. They don't see their own potential.
Yeah, and it kills me too because I've worked for myself since like 2006. I've been freelancing, and it's a struggle,
Yeah.
and it's hard, and but it's so freeing because I get up every day and I go, you know what? I can literally do whatever I want to do, and I can make anything happen. Just I can, sure, I can't just go out and say I'm gonna make $100,000 today. If I knew how to do it, I'd go for it. But I'm like, but I can do the things that could lead me in the direction to make something happen, and there's so much power to that. And it drives me nuts when people are like, "Yeah, but you have this, you have this." I'm like, "You're breathing right now. Your mind is working. It's like I could see that you got hands and legs. That's helpful." I just try to like I just think that I just am an advocate that anybody in that situation can do anything, and a lot of people like push a get back against that. But I'm like, "You're alive. Just fucking this is all just bullshit. Just be
I
playful
just
with
want
it."
to, look, at the end of the day, I just want to, like, my goal in life is to wake up in the morning and not feel like going back to bed. that,
That's a real fucking,
that's
that's a
basically
great way to look at it.
and that, I'll be honest, that doesn't happen every day.
Dude, I had 2.5 years where I wanted to do that because I got divorced and like all this crazy shit. And I mean, I was crazy exhausted. And I remember I woke up, it was like someone was like, "What's your goal this year?" I go, "I want to stop having to go back to bed after I get up." I was like, I am so tired of being exhausted. And it finally happened. It's like then I just took the steps to do that. But that's a great way. If you get up and you're like, "Cool, I'm not trying to hide from the day." So,
Because look, I've been there and I still go there certain days where like I literally wake up and I just feel like, well, today's going to be a wash because I'm going to do as little as possible. And that's part of my own sort of issues with depression and sort of like, depression for me has always been a very paralyzing thing, depending on, and I've had different cycles with it where, there have been times where I've been extremely high functioning and then times where I'm like literally just like in bed for days. At this point, reading all the different theories of depression in the medical literature and stuff like that, I do feel like the most likely situation here is the trauma theories. And I think that's, reading that book again was just, for me, it made me realize like, okay, like don't cop out and just be like, oh, well, my silly brain chemistry. Yes, your brain chemistry is involved, but it's not the only factor. Again, it's about integrating everything and understanding that no one factor is pushing all the levels. They're working in concert. So wherever you can relieve the pressure, find those points and relieve the pressure. And that's really all I can do.
this has always been this bad for you, even when you were a teenager? Like,
Oh, God,
is
yeah.
there a point where it's been less as
No.
bad?
Like I remember
Wow.
being depressed as a child. I remember being like 5 or 6 years old and like sitting in a room by myself and just feeling like, what's the point of life?
Wow.
Yeah. Dark.
That's
but,
shit right there.
but it's, I mean, that's what's crazy about it is that like I don't have a point of reference. It's not like I can go back to some time there when I was happy.
It's just baked
It's
in.
it's really baked into my experience. And anytime I think about like go back to a time when you're happy, it's probably fairly relatively recent.
Did you find like that writing music, being in these bands, get like something about hardcore, there's an aggression you're getting out and you're like, oh, it's like I'm so fucking pent up and it's like I'm getting this out. And like when you started writing music and like got in Shelter and all that, like later on in your, like did you find that playing guitar, writing riffs, like that helped release any of this shit?
Um, I don't know about release, but express. I think there's a difference. I think people often talk about using art as a release in some way, and I get that. I mean, for me, a release was more like going into the mosh pit and fucking shit up, right? Like that's a release. The songs and the writing in general for me has always been an expression. It's always been about what's a feeling that I have that I want to capture and put in a bottle for whatever reason. And I think that I can look back at every song I've ever been a part of and sort of understand what the feeling in the bottle was, like what I was trying to express.
What got me into music and emo, punk, hardcore, emo, post-hardcore, all this stuff was just there's something about a chord or a lyric that really just hits me somewhere and I'm like, oh my God, that's like that it like heightens whatever the emotion is that I'm feeling and like it makes me just stay there and I want to feel it for a while. I had so many times, I'm not even kidding, where if I have like a really shitty thing happen, like I had a really bad breakup years ago, and like again I had a divorce. So like when those moments where you just want to sit down and make yourself
Oh
feel like
yeah.
shit, so you put on like you put on the saddest song or whatever.
Uh-huh. In there.
So that one of those songs for me, one of those songs for me is "Do You Know Who You Are?"
Oh, that's an interesting one.
That one because I hate instrumentals. I do not like them. Like I'm not a big fan of explosions in the sky. Like I think they're good, but I can't sit there and I need lyrics for some
Interesting.
reason. That is, and I've said it so many times, that is probably the only instrumental piece that's not supposed to be. Like, the whole record's got
Yeah,
lyrics, but that song is my all-time favorite instrumental,
that's
like
amazing.
at the top of the list. And I've always put that on when I've like want to just feel like crap, I'll throw that song on because those notes and just the way it's structured, just like when the down, 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 like once that hits in, I'm like, oh, like I'll
I mean,
lose
what
it.
I love, what I love about that, is that that song was a accident. It sort of changed the trajectory of the record, which is why it's called "Do You Know Who You Are?" It's the title track, because that song started because we had to book studio time well in advance, right? Jay's a busy person. He had a schedule. Studio has its own schedule. And so that put like this little bit of stopwatch on our writing period for the album. I'm not the most prolific writer. My feeling is that like I can write, like if I'm really trying, like I can write one or two really good songs a month, maybe. But like
That's pretty good.
after that, like, like I don't know.
That's still pretty. That's a good track record.
So we had that, so we went in and we already felt like, wow, are we making an EP? Like, we were like, shit, because the deadline was coming up. And I was like, I don't know, we'll figure it out. We'll just start, recording and, whatnot. And so we actually wrote that song in the studio. And it was just something where, I had that tone already because we were recording another song. While Jay was doing something else and no one was in the room, I just started playing that first riff and I just looped it in my brain, I just kept playing it and playing it and playing it. And everybody was just like, that's fucking cool, man. And I was like, I know, it's really cool. Like, I guess it can be something. And so, Garrett sat down with his guitar and we just started doing it because that was like at a time when we were really listening to a lot of bands that did these sort of like cool dual guitar stuff. And the band that really comes to mind at that time was Seam. We were obsessed with Seam. And so this felt like a little bit, like, oh, cool. This is sort of like, Seam style, like guitar interplay. And then, Jay heard it and was just like, let's record it. Let's just do it. It was like, okay. So we started recording it and it really just was written as it happened. We got to the end of that recording and sort of figured out what it was going to be. And it needed something else. And Jay was like, I have an idea if you don't care if I play. And I was like, yeah, play. So he came in and did the feedback track. All of the feedback on the track is Jay. And when he did that, I was like, that's it. You completed it. It's beautiful. And I wanted to start the record with it. I was obsessed with it. But I was outvoted and we got put into the middle of the record, which at that time we always thought about side A and side B. I don't know if people do that anymore.
Yeah. When vinyl was actually a thing.
Yeah.
Well, actually, now it is a thing.
That was the compromise, was that it would start side B. And yeah, like I'm so happy that that's on the record because I think it really provided a larger scope of sort of our influences and what we were really about. And I think the record would have been less without it.
What's your favorite song that you've ever heard that someone write?
My
like one of them
ever?
Well, like I mean, no. I mean, like what's one of your like 5 hours later, like and then there's this one, right. like just like what comes top to mind? You're like, I love listening to songs still to this day.
I mean, I can tell you what the first thing that comes to my mind is easily, "Greatest Day" by Take That.
My point is trying to make it. What I'm trying to make is that when you guys wrote, do you know who you are? Like that song. The way it affected me and the way I carry it, it's like, I'm like, do you see how big this is to me? But I think it's like when you're the one making it, I don't know if you can see that. Or it's like when you listen to it, it makes you feel the same way as that song.
I would say it depends, but at least like it depends on who you are as a writer. For me, I do. If I don't feel affected by something I write, I know it's crap. And that's why I think I'm not prolific, because I don't even let people hear the stuff that I don't like. Like I just throw it away. So it's like, for example, I can tell you that when I came in with the skeleton of A Jack with One Eye, I remember feeling like this is a special song. We fleshed it out, in one practice. And by the end of that practice, when I went home with the boombox tape, I was literally just on the floor. I was like, I can't believe we made this. I love this so much. And it was it was pretty close to the finished version. I mean, there's still some mushmouth lyrics and things like that, but it was like, but the "Your Place Is Still at the Heart of My Everything" line was in it. Just hearing that and just the whole thing, like it just clicked so well that there is a point where you sort of lose control of a song and it leaves you. And when you listen to it again, it feels like you didn't even have a part in making it.
When people would talk about the records you had to get, I mean, for me and my friends, someone gave us Static Prevails from Jimmy Eat Worlds.
Mhm.
They gave us Power Failing by Mineral. And it's so funny when you said you wanted to start the whole record with "Do You Know Who You Are?" It reminded me of when they started like "End Serenading" with that really slow song, but it just like never broke in. And I was like, when is this gonna fucking kick ass? And it was like, and it didn't. And I was like, God damn, there's a couple songs that I like.
Well, I'll be honest. I've said this before. Like the idea to start with "Do You Know Who You Are" is absolutely coming from Rodan. Like I don't know if you are ever a fan of Rodan. They were a band from Louisville in the early to mid '90s. Just phenomenal band. But if you think of Rodan, you think of just this abrasive, super crazy post-punk, nutty thing. But if you listen to the first song on Rusty, they start the album with this like beautiful, quiet thing. And then it goes into like Insanity, but not before like, I mean, I want to say that it's been a long time since I listened to that record, but I want to say it was like 5 minutes long or something before they broke into anything, which, at the time I was just like, holy shit. But it was the most beautiful thing. And I loved both aspects of the band so much that, I was just like, this is dope. This is like where I want to be. Like just put it all out there. The beauty, the anger, the fucking, whatever, just put it all out there. You don't have to like bifurcate your band.
Well, I mean that it just totally it meshes. Like we talked about at the beginning when you were saying like hardcore music was so much in one direction where you needed to kind of like balance it out with other things. I thought that was interesting that a lot of you guys came from these hardcore bands, and the progression from that to post-hardcore just made so much more sense because it was almost like hardcore is like this tight ball of just like super fast, just aggression, and then when you kind of let it open up a little bit and expand, it's like you can kind of just let a little bit more guitar riffs come out. Like when you were talking about Snapcase earlier, the thing that stood out to me when I first heard them was the guitar. That those guitar riffs made them stand out from other hardcore bands because they were adding music.
They had a point of view that was different. And like I think that's the thing, right? Like I think the bands that we remember are the ones that you can really look at and say they had a distinct point of view. Even when I think about the Promise Ring and the first time I heard the Promise Ring, they sent me a demo to review in Antimatter. I was like, I love this. This guy, he has this voice that's super weird and he lisps and like, and it's sort of like indie, but it's sort of punk. And I was like, I'm super into this. And like, that's how we met. Like on the first tour, Texas tour, I booked it. And when we played in Madison, I just asked the promoter, do you know these people in the Promise Ring and can they play the show? And, we became super tight after that. But that's this unique point of view. Like the one thing about Texas, like I will say again, like I'm never going to be the guy who's going to be like, we were amazing. Like, I still think that to a certain extent, being a successful band is partly luck, circumstance, the time, right time, right place, right chain of events. You know what I mean? Like, because again, there were
absolutely
so many amazing bands who, didn't become as successful as we did and should have. The one thing I will say about Texas is that I do think we had a distinct point of view. I do think that even when you talk about us within the scope of all the other quote unquote emo bands, what emo band sounds like us? There was something about what we did that distilled what we were into in a way that maybe other people couldn't really fully absorb. Because, from our perspective, like if you captured us in 1995 and said, okay, name all your favorite bands, I mean, you pretty much would have got a bunch of things that I think would have explained a lot. Number one would have been the Beatles. We were super into that. We were super into like Oasis and Verve. We were super into Superchunk was a big one for us. Fugazi, absolutely Fugazi, and Jawbox and Lungfish. That was the DC trifecta for us. that we were obsessed with. We were from New York, so of course we were playing in drop D because everyone from New York was playing in drop D. And, and that was sort of like, that was New York's sort of contribution to it. And I mean, I would say, like, especially on the 7-inch, there's still a lot of hardcore tropes in there. We always say, like, if it's here when we get back, that's a mosh part. You can call it other things, but that's a mosh part. So, and Seam was the other one that just like super, super massive Seam fans. And I think if you sort of threw all those things together, it makes sense that we sounded the way we did.
No, I mean, I think it's funny, and this just and I know there's no connection, but I definitely Garrett's voice, and you said Oasis. Did anybody ever ask him if he had any like Liam Gallagher influence on his voice?
I found Garrett this way. I was living at Equal Vision, at the Equal Vision loft in Chelsea. Copper, which was the band that he was in at the time, were on Equal Vision. I remember listening to the Copper 7-inch. He didn't sing for Copper, he played bass, but he did sing backup vocals on one song. And I remember listening to that song and saying to this girl that I was hanging out with at the time, this girl Alicia, I was like, that kid can sing. I don't know if he knows it yet, but he's hitting that note and I feel it. It's real. And so it just sort of like made a mental note. And then one day I'm hanging around the house and Steve Reddy, who owns Equal Vision, is on the phone and he's freaking out. So I sort of like, of course, I love drama and I want to go into the room and hear what he's out about. And so apparently he's on the phone with Garrett, and Garrett got kicked out of Copper. And Steve's just livid because Garrett was a very, even though he was only the bass player, he was actually sort of the most charismatic member of the band. So kicking him out, they were going to survive musically. They're a fine band, but a band needs someone to look at, like a real sense of like confidence and charisma. He brought that to the table. So Steve was not happy. And I'm listening to him talk, and Steve's, basically trying to figure out how he's going to talk to the band and get them to reverse their decision. And at some point I walk over and say to Steve, like, hey, is that Garrett? And he's like, yeah. I was like, can I talk to him when you're done? And he's like, yeah. So meanwhile, I'm in my mind trying to sabotage Steve's plan to keep Garrett in Copper. Steve gives me the phone. And I go into my room and I talk to Garrett and I'm just like, so man, fuck, you got kicked out. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, that sucks. I was like, what are you going to do? He's like, I don't know. I feel like I just need to get the fuck out of Buffalo. I was like, I agree. I think you should absolutely get the fuck out of Buffalo. I was like, you should come to New York City. And he was just like, fuck, it's so expensive. What the fuck am I going to do? I was like, I don't know, we'll figure it out. I was like, all of our friends have jobs that, where we hook up our friends with jobs all the time. Like, we'll figure it out. And I was like, and anyway, like, I wanted to talk to you about something because I was like, Chris and Scott and myself, we've had this band that we've wanted to do for ages and we want a singer. And I think you can sing. And he's like, I don't know if I can do that. Like, he had sang for a band before, but it was sort of like a hardcore band. And he knew that we also wanted somebody who played guitar, and he was like, I don't play guitar. And I was like, I'll teach you. It'll be fine. You play bass, close enough. So, so he comes out and literally, like, the first practice, I mean, pretty much I would say the entire 7-inch was done by the first practice. Like, it was so just on point. And he wasn't playing guitar yet. At that point, we just sort of like went through the whole thing with him just singing and sort of like getting used to that and figuring out what his voice was. Honestly, like, I would say, like, I don't think he really thought about it that much. I think he just sang the way that it felt right for him to sing. I'm sure that obviously, like, you listen to any sort of Liam Gallagher, there's a part of what I think Liam did for Garrett more than anything was I think he gave Garrett more swag. I remember like playing shows where Garrett would walk out on stage and just look, it was almost like he was looking the audience like straight in the eyes, and he would just put his hands above his head and just start clapping. It was so audacious. No one in hardcore were doing moves like that. That was like a rock and roll sort of like, I'm the shit kind of move. But I fucking loved it. Like, because that point, like, and it influenced me. Like, it made me feel like I have to walk on stage. Like, I don't want to be like the guy who's just like looking at his shoes. Like, I want to let the crowd know that, like, I'm here, we're paying attention, we're presenting something to you that we love confidently, I think that matters. That's part of a performance to me. And I guess there's also a part of time where you have to sort of accept what you are. And I think like hardcore and metal, like a lot of people talk about like, well, I just go on stage as I am, t-shirt and jeans. I'm not putting up no front. I'm not fake. I'm real, whatever. If someone's paying these days $20 or $30 to see you, you better think about what you're putting on your body. You better think about what you look like when you walk on stage. You better think about how you move. You better think about engaging with the audience, looking at them, being a part of this together, being like putting on a real show. Because otherwise you're ripping people off. Our feeling, I think, after a certain amount of time was that it wasn't like the rock and roll thing was about being better than you. It was about saying that we cared enough to put on a show, to give you something to look at. If you just want to listen to the music, you can go do that anytime. Spotify.com. Go for it. But if you come to see a show, that person should give you something.
Is this a conversation you guys had before? Like because starting the band, you guys all came from these different bands where you already had that comfort or just the mileage where you've been on stage, you performed. So once you have that you just, I mean, I've done it before. Like I was in a band, like you carry that with you to the next thing you go to. So the four of you getting on stage in the beginning, did you just kind of get up and go, okay, this is our first show, let's give them something?
No.
Or did you
because we were scared. Honestly, we just felt like what we were doing was a little bit different, and we just didn't know that anyone would like it or care. We were shocked at the immediate response. We didn't know that we were good. And I think like, that sounds very egotistic, but factual.
That's fine.
We didn't know that we were good. We didn't know that we were good. I remember just like being the guy looking at my shoes at some of, a bunch of our first shows, because I didn't want to look at the audience, because I didn't want to see you judging me. Right. I don't think it was until the album came out that we started moving into a place where we were confident and where we knew that, look, if they're at your show, if they came to the show, they like you. You've already passed that level. So now let's figure out what the next level is.
And this is like after you put out the 3 songs?
I would say after the album is when we became like really confident.
How soon after did you, because you guys only have 2 releases, and then you have the split 7 inches, but the split 7 inches, were those songs were they specific to the split, or were they included in the other?
No, they were, so the first one was the first version of Something to Forget, which we only made a second version because the first version, I think we felt didn't work live. So we sort of went back to the drawing board with it, and that's the version on the album. And that version works live, so that's good. And then and Blue Boy was just for the split.
So you guys put out, how soon after the EP did you put out the full length?
The EP came out in the fall of '95, and the album came out in spring of '96.
Were they both on Revelation? You were on Revelation the whole time, right?
Yep.
So like when you guys put out the EP, did you automatically start going on really good tours?
I mean, we busted our ass. Like I said, I was booking us for the first couple of tours. I think the first American tour we did was sort of like a co-headline-y thing with Shift, which was fun. And that was cool. I think the first European tour we did with Sam I Am, which was also cool and also sort of coming from the antimatter world. But and we got asked on a lot of like weekend things with friends like Quicksand and Game Face and different bands like that. So it was like
so fucking wild.
We were definitely playing good shows, and yet we were also sort of like very conscious of trying not to leapfrog over where we thought we should be. We wanted to do things organically. Even when it came down to picking a record label, at the time, the solid offers that we had on the table were Atlantic, Columbia, Art Monk Construction, J Tree, and Revelation. We were just sort of like this is weird. I mean, because that wasn't what we sort of got together to sort of decide. Like, I think we all just thought like, oh, we'll put out a record on J Tree or something and that'll be cool. But having all these different options right off the bat made things different. And it was a different time. Most of our friends were on major labels at that point, at least in New York. We had Quicksand and Into Another and Sick of It All and Civ and like all these bands that we were, tight with, Orange 9mm, everybody had signed. So there was almost this expectation that we were going to sign as well. I think this was our Fugazi showing. We were just like, no, like maybe later, we'll see. But no, we want to be an indie band. That's who we are. We chose Revelation ultimately because they were the label in the middle. At the time, Art Monk and J Tree were sort of like, J Tree wasn't really big yet. Art Monk wasn't really big. Atlantic and Columbia were too big. Revelation seemed like the bowl of porridge that was just right.
Yeah, they were like that. You were right. They were that middle label where when you said the name and someone was on that label, you're like, "Holy crap, they're on Revelation!" But they also, you wouldn't be like, "Oh, those fucking sellouts, they're so big." But Revelation had so many fucking bands.
Yeah, and I mean, they were doing really good stuff at the time that I felt like, even if it wasn't totally my wheelhouse, like I respected it a lot. Even bands like Iceburn and Engine Kid, obviously we loved Sensefield, Farside. There were a lot of bands that were doing cool stuff. It was important to me, I think, as a New York band specifically, to connect myself to where I came from. There's no way to do that better than Revelation. That was literally the label that okay, put it this way. I sold all of my hardcore records. Over time, I've sold them all. I literally only own one piece of vinyl left from my youth. And that was the New York City Hardcore Way It Is comp, the one that I bought when it came out. That comp was that meaningful to me. Like, that comp made me feel like a part of something. And so, being a part of Revelation at that time was like, yeah, this is exactly where we should be.
Did they help you guys? Like, did you feel a bit of a relief that they had your back with?
Yeah, at that time, they were great. I mean, they had amazing distribution, for an indie label. They were selling a lot of records all around. We sold a lot of records right off the bat that I think, obviously, being on Revelation, people are willing to give you a chance at that time. So we absolutely benefited from them. But more than anything, and I'll say this, like, from beginning to end, like, I just really always, back then I was very strongly just happy that they believed so strongly in the band. Like, Jordan, I don't even know that I sent Jordan the demo as a like, hey, we should be on your label. I think I just sent it to him as a friend. And I'm pretty sure like he was just like, because I remember like, I was just like, this is just what we're working on. Because it was literally like, we recorded that for $100 in the basement of our friend's house in Boston. And Jordan was like, this is what I want to put out. This exact thing. I don't want you to re-record it. This is the thing. I want to put this out. And I was like, fuck, really? So, I mean, props to Jordan for having that ear, because if it was me, I might not have put that out.
Did you feel like leading up to this though, there's a lot of bands out there when they're writing music, or there's people in general where they're trying so hard to make a thing happen. And sometimes it will. I think it's a smaller percentage. If it's good, if it's backed by something really good, then yeah, it works. But sometimes something's missing and they're trying so hard and you're just getting defeated. And then you guys come together and you do this, and it's like, did you want this thing to really take off, or did you want it to just, you're like, it's something else I'll do?
I've struggled with this my whole life, this idea that and people will tell you otherwise, but I'm being totally honest with you. I have like serious problems with ambition, meaning that I don't know that I have much. I think if I had ambition the way some people have ambition, I would be someplace completely different in my life. I just like doing things as long as they feel good.
But I like that though, because there's a bunch of interviews I've done where people that I look up to, and it's not like they're living this grand life with this big mansion, which I don't even think that's a grand life. I think it's very sad, or like just cold, and it's just, I don't know. That doesn't draw me. But there's people out there that I've talked to, like Mike Park was one of them, Asian Man Records, and he was just like, I just want to make. He's like, I just like want to have a good time, and like how you said before, like you're like, I want to wake up and just be happy. I think if you live that simply, or a simple style like that, that is like the best way to do it, because when you're trying to do so much stuff, I think that's what depresses people besides other issues. But I think that's what beats people up, because they're like, why the fuck am I not there? Why am I not there? It's like, why are you trying to, it's like, just
Well,
have a good time. Like, what's gonna make it
yeah, I
fun?
mean, I think that one of the things that sort of, I should preface that by saying is that not having ambition is not the same thing as not making smart decisions. Meaning that if I'm going to do something that involves work and time and effort, and creative soul, I do believe that there's nothing wrong with being compensated for that. And so as
Yeah.
a matter of course, if I engage myself in a project, of that scale, whether it be a less creative project, I still think about, well, okay, let me think about the financials. That's just something that's just a part of my way of being, I think, from having left home so early and having to think about your financials. Like, for as long as I can remember, I was like, okay, what is my minimum amount of revenue that I can make every month without living paycheck to paycheck? What's the maximum amount of rent that I can spend? What's my maximum overhead? You know what I mean? Constantly making those formulations. And I think I was the same way in bands. And I think that's why even early on, it's not that Texas was making hand over fist, but we all came home with money after every tour. And we all got a lot of royalties.
Well, it rewarded you the ability to keep doing it.
Right.
It's just fucking instinct as a human being for survival. I mean, when people talk about money, it's like, yeah, money does bring fucking happiness if your bills are paid and you don't have to stress about
Right.
it. Like, I'm a huge advocate. Like, that's totally fine that people are like, "Oh, I don't want money." It's like, yeah, you should fucking want it.
And there were stressful points. Like, we definitely made decisions that where we probably than we could have, even up to 2012, right? Like, so in 2012, when the anthology record was being put together and we recorded those songs and we were talking about how we were going to tour for it, our booking agent, called me up and said, so, okay, I'm putting something out there. I'm not saying whether or not it's a good or a bad idea, but it's a lot of money. And I was like, okay. And essentially, I want to say it was Live Nation, whoever owns all the House of Blues, I think it's Live Nation, put together an itinerary, a tour routing of Live Nation venues, and then an amount of money that they guarantee us no matter how many tickets sell. And it was a lot of money. And we were like, oh, so we had to discuss, like, because it was like, shit, we could obviously just book our own tour, book our own routing. And, we were doing the math of what the guarantees would be for those tours or for those shows and whatnot. And it wasn't as much money as if we just took the Live Nation deal and ran. But, at the end of the day, we were like, what's important, the money or the shows? Are these shows going to be as good as the shows we book ourselves that are completely like curated by ourselves, both in venue and city? And we couldn't honestly say yes. We couldn't honestly say that playing the House of Blues in Maryland was going to be a better show than playing the Black Cat in DC. At the end of the day, it was more like, well, we need to play better shows. It's about the shows. We're not doing this again, right? Like, this is it. So let's play the best possible shows. And it's not like we weren't getting paid anything for these shows. It was fine. We were making good money. But again, it's just like, we do that. We have definitely made decisions where we took less money for something that we thought was better.
Yeah, there's something about, though, taking a lot of money and then showing up in the middle of, who the fuck knows, like Iowa, and it's not that big of a crowd. I don't know if that really matters, but there's something to that. You're like, the energy that we were trying to create, it's not as
It depends on
cool.
who you are. I can tell you right now that I know a lot of bands who'd be happy to play to fucking 50 people in a 1,000 cap room in Iowa if they were getting paid 20 grand.
Yeah,
Like,
that's a good point. That's a good point.
maybe at a different point in my life, I would have been like, maybe we should talk about this. But, like, it wasn't in the cards for me now. Like I make a fine living. I don't need, a shit ton of money. What am I doing it for? If I take my guitar back out, it's because I want to play a good show.
I went to the Irving Plaza show in 2012. Actually, no, wait, because on your website there's the Hate 56. That
Hmm.
guy, he has his videos. I love that guy like documents all this stuff. It's amazing. Um, that was the first reunion show, right? It was 2012 when you guys played Irving Plaza, or did you do that? Was that another time?
2006, we did two shows at Irving.
That was it. Yeah.
And then in
Okay.
2012, I think that was Revelation 25.
Yes. All right. So I went to the show in 2006 when, because you guys, that was when certain bands were starting to come back around and do reunion shows. Like Lifetime, they got together and played three shows in 2006, I believe, because I went to the Asbury show. And then you guys got back together and played that show. And I was like, this is fucking insane. All these bands that I wanted to see, I like Sunny Day, they got back together in some point in that, and I saw them. It was like then fucking refused. It was like probably one of the best times for me to go see shows. I was so fucking excited when you guys did that and got back together. Like, how long was it between you guys breaking up and playing that show in 2006?
Almost 10 years. And, like, so we broke up in 97, and so 2006 just sort of felt like an interesting time. I mean, I think we did it because it was the 10th anniversary of the album. That seemed like a good reason, but also like we all had been living like in the 10-year interim between that and the band breaking up. We'd all moved all over the country, and in 2006 we somehow all were back in New York. Daly had a birthday party that summer, or I think it was a birthday party, I don't remember, some sort of barbecue situation, and he invited us all to the barbecue situation. It was the first time we had all been in the room together probably since we broke up. Like we had all like hung out with each other in different levels, but never like all four of us. I think that kind of started the wheels turning because we all just thought, well, we like each other again. Let's do it. Let's just play two shows. Well, we actually, I should say, take that back. We had no intention of playing two shows. We were like, let's play one show, and we thought it would be at Bowery Ballroom, and that would be like amazing. And then our booking agent, Tim Edwards, said, no, are you fucking crazy? It's got to be bigger than that. And we were like, are you crazy? Like, no one wants to see us. We've been broken up for like 10 years. I thought Bowery was a reach. And he was like, it's at least Irving. And I was like, what's Irving cap? And he's like, 1,100. I was like, oh, fuck, dude. If no one buys tickets, I'm going to be so pissed at you.
But didn't it sell out in
It sold
like?
out in like 4 minutes.
Yeah, I remember good. I was on the website. We all were like, we coordinated. We're like, all right, everyone, you have to log in at this time and just start fucking hitting
Right.
refresh till you can get to the page. And I remember I got it and they were gone.
I was fucking mortified when that happened. I couldn't believe it. I was so just like, because, I think people tell you over the years how much they loved your band, but like, you're sort of like, yeah, 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 but when it comes time to put your money where your mouth is, like, you don't love us that much. And then, like,
Yeah.
that happened and it was like, holy shit. So then, Tim Edwards called me after it was official, and he said, okay, so first of all, do you believe me? And I was like, okay, you win. And he's like, okay, second of all, do you trust me? And I was like, why? And he's like, I reserved 2 nights. I was just like, oh, fuck you. And he's like, if we put the tickets on sale tomorrow, they're gonna sell out. Trust me. I was like, fuck, man. All right. I was just so nervous. And these didn't sell out in 4 minutes. They sold out in like an hour. But it was still like, I was like, fuck, I couldn't believe, like it was just so, it just made me feel so good that people gave a shit. Yeah, those shows were really great. They were special.
I was in a band, like a punk band in Jersey, and we got into the scene around 97 and then started kind of getting a little bit of recognition like 98, 99. We broke up in 2000. But at that time, when we got into the scene, the doors were open where it was every genre that had been like kind of like coming up around, there was all together. So when you go to a show, there'd be someone there just selling CDs of, you guys, Lifetime, hardcore bands, like all of this stuff. But a lot of you guys had already broken up. So a lot of us who got into the scene in 97, we started listening to your stuff then, and we're like, well, this sucks because we can't fucking see these guys. Like I said before, like we were huge Mineral fans. We were fans of you guys, Lifetime. Um, Christ, who else? I mean, there's so many fucking bands I can say, and all you guys are broken up. So I think my feeling for me personally is when you guys got back together in 2006, I was that I get to finally have that thing I wasn't able to do,
Right.
and it's a guess, but I think a lot of people felt that, and they were
Well,
like,
here's the thing.
we never got a
Here's
chance
the
to
thing that
fucking
we
see these
felt,
guys.
and I think this is sort of legitimate. I think we also felt like we got to do the thing we didn't get to do, which was in our brains after a while, especially after the album came out. I think we realized that we were a rock band. Like even like you look at the quote unquote emo bands and stuff. I mean, the closest to a rock band was Jimmy Eat World, but even at that time, they weren't really that popular. They were still like on our last American tour, they were going to be the first of three, but then I kind of was just like, oh, I don't want to do that. I think it should just be us and Promise Ring. And I was like, look, man, I want to take you guys out, but take you guys out right. Like not first of three. Like you deserve better. I love your band. Is that kind of conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, so aside from Jimmy, I didn't really like see like any of the other bands as like rock bands per se. Like I really just felt like we were sort of a rock band. I felt like, I was starting to understand why there was a bidding war for us. I was starting to understand that like, okay, like we could be playing like these big venues. We aren't a t-shirt and sneakers band, and like that's okay. Like maybe we need to like lean in on that. The songs that we play, they are a little bit more abrasive and anthemic, and sort of like they just sort of do a different thing than what a lot of our friends' bands are doing. When we broke up, I think like we probably got up to a place of like, let's say Bowery Ballroom level, like 500, 600 people coming to the shows.
Per night.
Right. Like, so that was sort of like where it was ending. Like our last tours in US and Europe were both sort of like in that zone. We were getting bigger. People were into this band. But we never really got to play a show where like what we considered a real show. Like when we opened up for Quicksand at the Academy in New York. So it was like us, Civ, and Quicksand. We were first of three. People were very cool and supportive, but it's not like anybody was there to really see us. We were very young at that point. But I remember the venue and just being like, fuck, and Quicksand had their own light guy and their own sound guy, and everything was just so like pro, and they had texts. And I was just like, yeah, man, that's awesome. I would love to have a second guitar,
And I want someone to bring it out to me when I just like point to my guitar, they run it out, and
exactly. Like I was just so like, and it wasn't like those things to me were like anti-hardcore. Like again, like it was just getting to that place of like just accepting the fact that people paid money to see you. You better put on a good show. And so that's what we did. Like that's how we treated the Irving Plaza shows. Like we got techs, we got a sound guy, we got a light guy. The light guy made a huge difference. You look at pictures from those shows, it looks like we're playing the fucking planetarium. It's amazing. Like,
yeah, it was sick.
We got Irving Plaza actually filmed it and gave us the DVDs. No one's ever seen it because if we ever release it somehow, we have to pay Irving Plaza money. But I have the DVDs. They're so much fun to watch. And it's so much fun to look at the light show specifically because he gave the guy the set list and then he wrote a light set. I was like, oh my God, like people do that. That's amazing.
I had no idea that.
Like it was amazing. So everything was choreographed. Everything was sort of like really just thinking about the show and thinking about the experience for the people who went out of their way to pay this money to come see us. And at that point, to be honest, we'd never played a show where the ticket price was $20. Like that was like, whoa.
No one's gonna pay this. That's crazy.
Well, that was another reason why I thought no one would come. Like I was just like, dude, we've never played a show that much money. And Tim Edwards was just like, dude, times have changed, man. And I was like, okay, fine, whatever.
I just interviewed Travis from Piebald, and he's like, "Yeah, we're going on tour with Dashboard Confessional, and the tickets are a lot of money." I was like, "Whatever, dude. Everyone who would want to go see you, everyone's got fucking jobs now. Like,
Well, that's true
they
too.
can afford this. We're not 16, and that's when $5 shows matter. It's like people have jobs and 401ks, and a lot of them are making good money. So just fucking cough up the 20 or 30 or even if it was
I'm
$70,
going to
like fuck
say
it."
is that I think it's fairly a safe bet to say that 70% of the people who came to those shows at Irving Plaza, I would say, have a better retirement plan than I do.
Yeah.
My
Yeah,
retirement plan being
exactly.
nothing.
Yeah, same here. I got shit.
I have nothing. So if they have a fucking $1,000 in a 401k, props to them. Give me another $20.
Yeah, exactly. There was a discussion. There's a Facebook group. It's how this podcast basically started. It was this North Jersey pop punk group, and someone posted about My Chemical Romance getting together currently, and they were just like bashing them for these ticket sales or something like that. And I was infuriated. I was like, "You got to be fucking kidding me!" That I was like, "God bless this band for doing this when bands don't make any money. They hardly 90 something percent of them never make any fucking money. So it's like, thank God that one of them is doing well, and they can take 10 years off and then do that well."
Well, but the other thing too is that, like, let's be real. Like, when you're playing at that scale, what do you think, that there's no union workers at arenas? Like, you don't think
Yeah.
that's expensive? You don't think
Yeah,
there
it's like
aren't?
you're not pulling up in your van and just like
Exactly.
plugging in on
I was like,
stage.
I'm going to guess that they're going to have at least 50 people on payroll for that tour. At least. At least. They're going to have semis. They're going to have, I mean, they're going to put on a fucking show, and it is going to cost money. And I mean, I realized that, like when we did those Irving Plaza shows, that was the whole thing. Like, to us, our guarantees for those shows were more than we've ever made as a band. We were like, holy shit. But we took that money and we spent it on other people. We spent it on the show. We spent it on, like, trying to make a great show. Not all of it, but you know what I'm saying? There's still, like, you're taking a chunk of it and saying, like, you know what? This is our production money. We're going to make the best possible show that we can make.
That's a great point that I don't think a lot of people realize. And I don't even think I ever actually really realized that until you said that.
Yeah. I mean, I think
That how much you're paying everyone else.
because I read a recent thread of people bitching about Rage Against the Machine. And, I'm like, look, man,
God.
those guys are like some of the most solid people that I've ever met in my life. First of all, if you can command audiences of 10 to 20,000 people, get paid.
Yeah.
God bless you.
Yeah.
You've earned it.
Yeah, fuck yeah.
That's one thing. The second thing is, again, they're playing arenas. It's not cheap, right? They're probably getting, decent discounts for, if they're playing with the same promoter in a variety of different markets. But that said, still not cheap. And also, again, like, this is it for them. What happens after Rage? This is it. This is their entire life. If their band breaks up tomorrow again, and, like, Zach never makes another dime on Rage Against the Machine, what do you expect him to do? He's not going to go to Whole Foods.
Yeah.
he's going to make the money he needs
Pay up
to live his life. If you appreciate it, pay him some money and go see the show. If you don't appreciate it, stay home. It's not that big a deal.
Yeah, and don't fucking bitch about it. All right, I have a couple more questions. I'm gonna let you go, but I did. What happens with the show that I went to? There was a slideshow before you guys came out,
Yep.
and there was static that played the whole time. And then when the slideshow was done, the screen lifted and the stage was dark. And then "Do You Know Who You Are" played, and then you guys came out. Was that a glitch? Was that supposed to play?
That was a fuck up. It was the audio didn't work for some reason, and so that was like a perfect example of, like, I remember just being backstage being like, fuck, like, it worked the second night, but it didn't work the first night. So the first night, it got fucked up.
Yeah, I think there was something I read online somewhere where I think someone interviewed you guys or like Garrett. So it was like, yeah, sorry about the people who came the first night. There was a glitch and the shit got fucked up, but it worked the second night. So
Yeah. That was a bummer. Thanks for reminding me, man.
Hey, man, just keeping it real.
But you know what's funny is that actually the beginning of our 2013 show also had a similar bummer. And this is where your hard-earned ticket dollars are going to work. We started playing. This was in Chicago. It was the first show of the tour. We started playing Back and to the Left. By the maybe like 20 seconds into it, my amp literally just blew up. And so I'm sitting there like, oh shit, fuck. I don't bring a backup amp. But so, you know, because this is what you do when you're a professional, the band continued to play. Garrett just was like holding it down as best as he could with one guitar. And my tech, Justin Skirty, immediately just runs into overdrive, grabs another band's Mesa Boogie amp, which I should say, I don't play Mesa Boogie. I hate the tone of Mesa Boogie. I fucking never, if he had given me a choice, I would have said, no, put that back. But, you know, he's quick thinking. He knows the show must go on. He's a professional. He runs on, connects my cabinet to the amp without turning it on, literally just turns the dials to a tone that he believes is closest to my tone without even listening to it. Turns it on, I play, and it's my tone. And he gets it done in like 30 seconds. Saves the whole show. So
how the fuck would he know that?
That's what a professional does. And professionals cost money. We had to pay him a salary. There's your ticket price.
This is a great lesson for all the people listening who have this like negative attitude towards ticket pricing. This is pretty great.
If you wanted a $5 show, we would have played for 20 seconds and said thank you, good night.
Yeah, and then you'd be like, I'm not playing out of a Mesa fucking Boogie. We're done.
I never would have plugged into that. So anyway.
What do you play at a Marshall? Yeah, you play out of a Marshall. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see it in the video. How bad was the breakup? That, like, were you guys talking afterwards? No. Or because I don't even know how you guys broke up.
I mean,
and I'm sure you've told this story so many fucking times, but like, there's a certain audience that doesn't know.
This is what I'll say about that. Our band is better when we're not a band. Our band is we're the best of friends when you don't slap Texas is the Reason on it. And as soon as you slap the name on it, things change. Things get weird. And, you know, it sucks because do we have an undeniable chemistry? 100%. Could we walk into a room tomorrow and make new music that sounds great? We did it last year, actually. We were all bored and just got together and started playing and writing new songs, and they were great. And then we stopped. Mostly because I just was like, you know, when it starts to feel too real, I kind of move away. Could we be a band tomorrow if we just could figure out how to get along? Yeah. I think we would make great music and great records. But we have a dynamic that literally, I think, hasn't worked since the beginning. I always talk about how if you're able to dig it up, our very first band bio that came out with our 7-inch, with the press stuff for our 7-inch. Our first bio was written by Mike Gitter. He's the guy at Atlantic, actually, who signed Jawbox and Sam I Am and Bad Religion. He's an old school hardcore guy from early 80s. He used to do a fanzine called XXX, and there was a XXX book that Bridge 9 recently put out the last couple years. So he's an old hardcore guy. We've known him forever. He was also a writer back then, so he used to write for, you know, all the magazines like Thrasher and Cream and, you know, all the metal mags. He would always write about the hardcore bands. You know, we didn't really know who else to write the bio, and he was like, I could do it. I was like, cool, that'd be amazing. So he wrote the bio after hanging out with me and Garrett one afternoon at his office. And I remember we got the bio back. The entire bio was basically about how we are so tightly wound up that we could break up at any second. And I was like, is this a smart bio to put out for your first record? But in the end, everybody sort of just was like, and I talked to Mike about it, and Mike was like, look, man, he's like, I'm a writer, right? Like, I just write what I observe. And I'm telling you right now that, you guys can explode at any minute. And I was just like, all right, man. In the end, we went with truth. We were just like, look, this is what he sees. This is also part of what he thinks makes us special. Let's go with it. But in the end, I mean, he was totally right. It's just a bizarre chemistry that really works in some ways and really doesn't work in others.
I can totally get that. I've had it happen twice where like my old band, Lanemeyer, when we get together, now it works because we can communicate, but we played a reunion show a couple years ago and we had 1 week to practice and get things done, and there was just things where I was like, oh, here we're back in it again. This is why we don't fucking do this. Because when there's something tied in, like when the goal is tied to 4 different or how many different personas or mindsets of what their vision is, unless the fucking 4 of you are on the same page, then it's gonna be difficult because there's people put too much weight on certain things.
Well, I equate it to this, like, and I don't have this experience so much because I have no family, but from what I've heard,
from what I've read,
people, so I've heard people say things like, whenever I go home to visit my family, it's like they treat me like I'm 10 years old again.
Yeah.
Or I feel like I'm 10 years old again. Like I relate to them in that way. I relate to them as a child, as a kid, as not an adult. And I think there's something about that with being in a band. I do think that ultimately when the 4 of us get back in a room and you slap the name Texas Is the Reason on us, we're all 21 again.
Yeah.
And we treat each other like we're 21 again. There might be minutes where like, or not minutes, but hours and days and even months where, we can be middle-aged men who know what's good for us. But the second one of us is triggered, we're 21 again. It sucks. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It sucks, but it's the reality.
Yeah. I mean, that is what family is like. You show up and you'll talk about current things, but then stories come up and it's like you're still in the same mindset as back then, and you're just like, and then you have like a very short amount of time but you're like, I need to get the fuck out of here. Like, I can't be around this.
Oh, right, exactly. And that's the other part of the scenario that I've heard a lot about, which is the get me the fuck out of here part.
Yeah.
And that's true. I mean, I think like, Garrett has asked me, like, for example, there was a point because he's just like, he doesn't like the fact that anytime we've ever done anything that I've been very adamant about saying that I'm not doing it again. And so that's how I felt in 2013 when we did the 21 shows around the world, or around US, Canada, and Europe. But from my perspective, it was very clear to me that we couldn't do it for longer than this. Like when we got to the last show in London on August 4th, 2013, I remember sitting in the dressing room with somebody, maybe my tech, Justin, and saying like, man, we're ending it at exactly the perfect time. Everything's still cool. And yet I feel like if we did it again, it would be pushing it. For me, there's a self-awareness here that we could explode at any minute. I mean, it's sort of just like Gitter said. It's just sort of just being able to acknowledge that and work within the confines of that reality. And, the fact is, it's a reality still.
That's crazy that you guys still have that. And it's funny, too, because people like from the outside looking in. I think there's bands people look up to and they think it's perfect. But
no, that's definitely never a band.
Yeah.
There's an insane amount of love ultimately that we have for each other. It's like, I'm never going to like talk shit about anybody in my band, no matter what. I don't care. We have our issues, but for me, it's still all love.
Were you a fan of Jets to Brazil when Chris started that with, Blake?
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't love the first record, if I'm honest.
Really?
But the second and third records, I adore.
Oh, God, I hate the third record.
Oh, the third record's the best one. I mean, the third one is really where I felt like Blake had sort of got a real groove with creating these songs that I think really successfully tell a story from beginning to end. I don't think he's ever really gotten there. I feel like that was the closest he's ever gotten. And that to me is an insane talent.
Interesting. I have to listen to that again. I remember that album starting, and I was kind of into it. And then as it went on, I'm like, this is not getting me. And then it just lost me. And then Four Corner Night.
I feel like it was sort of like the Woodwater of Jets to Brazil. Like I think Woodwater is my favorite Promise Ring record because I listen to that record, and maybe this has something to do with just being around them and knowing them, but that record to me was so true to who they are. It was the truest Promise Ring record I think there was. And so when I listen to it, I just think of my friends and who they are. That's the one.
When they started that band and they went on tour, and they did really well right off the bat, and they held that for a really long time. Was like, what were your feelings towards that?
I mean, I was stoked for them. When I did New and Original with Jonah, we did a tour with Jets to Brazil, and it was great. I mean, I again, like I was probably the person who responsible for breaking up Texas is the Reason, right? Like I was definitely the person who was the first one to say, I don't know how long I can do this, with Chris definitely being the second. I was happy for him. We tried after Texas broke up, Chris and I tried playing together for a little bit. We actually started something with Walter Schreifels for a minute that didn't really work out because Walter and I have just very different writing styles. We were well wishers of each other, basically. I was happy that he was still able to do what he loved.
Is there any, before we go, is there any like, because I know you've done probably a decent amount of interviews about Texas the Reason. Is there any like tech story that you've never got to tell about that time where you're like, every time you do an interview, like, I really wish I could finally tell this story?
You know what? I mean, I'm sure there is. There's always stuff that you never say, but it's sort of one of those things where the memory has to be jarred somehow.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's never I love like when I'm doing an interview, and I think like it happened at one point during this time where I said, "Oh, I've never actually said this before."
Yeah.
So like, but when you have those moments where your memory is jarred and you're like, "Oh, fuck yeah," like that's really an interesting story, or something becomes interesting by virtue of the context that it jarred in your memory. There are things that I've definitely never said in interviews, but largely it's because it's sort of like the keep the dirty laundry in-house thing. We had fun. There were definitely like that experience, I think, of being the subject of a major label bidding war in the 1990s, to me is such a unique, weird experience that so few people can really sort of bond with. Majors were after everyone, but the bidding wars, like the people who really like, and at the time of at our time, the three major bidding wars that were happening were us, Girls Against Boys, and Jonathan Fire Eater. And when I say major bidding wars, I mean multiple millions in the offer. A lot of people were getting signed. Not everyone was getting the multiple millions. So that was like something where it was just like, that's a frenzy. That's like something that I can't even explain to people, because it fucks with your brain in such a way, to where you're going crazy because you think, why are they crazy for thinking that we're worth that much? Or you start to sort of believe that maybe you are worth that much, and maybe that's not a good thing. Ultimately, all three of those bands, it didn't work out, right? Jonathan Fire Eater blew up, not in a good way, but imploded. Much in the way that we did.
Yeah.
Girls Against Boys made their major label record that flopped and imploded. It's just not, that type of attention's not healthy. I'm just happy that I've always been able to sort of, I'm not going to say see through it, because I've definitely been under the veil. I've always at least sort of tried to keep my pragmatic hat on and sort of be realistic about what I do, who I am, what it's worth.
I think in some aspect, when labels are doing that, maybe it's designed to cause that shit to happen. I don't know, like the numbers that you're saying, the numbers they throw to these bands, where it's just kind of like, it's like lottery winners in like that go bankrupt like the next year. Like they're just not ready for it.
Well, that's the other thing too, right? Like a lot of these bands, they make all this money and they spend it all.
Right.
And I'm like sort of almost happy that we broke up before we signed, because like had we gotten that money and blew it all, I think that would have been sadder for me
You might have even
than
less
not
of
getting the money at all.
you might have even less of a 401k.
Oh, I mean, trust me, like, I in my mind, I had already spent that money. I already knew what I was already like, I'm gonna get an apartment, I'm gonna buy this amazing new rig, I'm gonna like I was just like, I mean, my wallet was open already and the money wasn't even in. So
I can't imagine.
it's not. And the funny thing is that, like, as an adult, looking at the kind of money that I probably would have made, I'm sort of like, oh, it's good money, but it's not like it wasn't going to set me for life. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. What do they say? It's like even if you're gonna retire, like even if you have like $1 million, it only lasts like certain like a very small amount of time or something. I don't know. I can make that shit ride.
It depends. I mean, you can definitely, like, I had an accident where I had settlement money maybe like 15 years ago, and I probably let that money ride for a good like 10 years. I used that settlement money more or less to cushion my life a little bit. Like, I was like, I'm just going to keep living my life the way I live,
Yeah.
but I'm just not going to, like, say no to the occasional treat yourself thing.
Yeah. I'm gonna get the extra guac a lot.
Yeah, like, I was just like, I want to know what that feels like. I want to know what it feels like to have my own apartment. Like, I had my own apartment for a while. I'd never lived alone. That was interesting to me. Like, just things like that where I was like, yes, do I need to live alone? No, I can get a roommate, but, like, this is an experience I just wanted to have. And maybe that's what it all boils down to for me. I'm an experience junkie. I like trying different things and just, I'm curious. I want to know stuff. And curiosity, kills many cats. I probably have used up a few lives. That's ultimately what drives me. I just want to know. I want to know how things feel.
I love that. Yeah, because you get, I mean, the materialist shit. It's you buy it and then you're like excited, then a day later you're like, nah, or maybe a couple days. I mean, granted, I did buy a record player like about a year and a half ago or so, and I still love the fucking thing. Like, there are certain things I'll buy,
Yeah.
but I'm also getting experience out of it now that I think about it. That's what's worth
Well,
it
we
to
all
me.
have things that, like, that we'll spend money on that people will be like, why are you doing that? I'm going to London in a couple of weeks, for a couple of weeks. The plan is just that I just want to write. I'm going to be making some music with a producer friend. I'm going to be writing for this book that I've been working on. That's sort of I'm hoping to get some traction on. Do I need to do that in London?
Yeah, of
That's probably a
course.
very expensive way of doing it. But on some level, yeah, I do. Like,
Yeah, it'll heighten it.
because being there is going to give me a different experience and a different feeling to draw from. And hopefully it will change some sort of, like, bad habits that I have when I'm just in my own comfort zone.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, getting anywhere out of town or out of your own place is going to make you just be a little bit more, I don't know, just less lazy with things or get in your own way.
Well, yeah, that too. That too. There's definitely a lazy sense, right? Like, where when you're sitting at home and it's like, well, I could work on some stuff, or I could just watch TV.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, well, look, man, dude, I still have a ton of episodes of Web of Lies that I haven't seen yet, and I need to get through those. Um, I'm doing it, but the point is I don't have that option in London. In London, it's just me. It's just me and myself, and I'm just going to do it. Hopefully, I'll get something out of it.
I like that. Think I need to do that. All right, man. Well, I'm going to wrap this up, even though I've been enjoying the fuck out of it. Okay, two questions I always end with. One, before we go, what do you want to plug? It could be either something that you're doing or you could do for somebody else.
So I guess I can say this, even though it's not super official. It's going to take a minute, but I am working on a second edition of the Antimatter book, and Revelation is going to reissue that.
Oh, nice.
So it's going to be an expanded edition with a new design, 25th anniversary interviews that I'll be adding to it, and a couple other things that I can't say yet. So I'm happy about that because I do feel proud of Antimatter. In terms of a lot of the things that I've done, that work is special to me. It's revealing, I think, of a lot of my mind. So I feel like it needs to exist.
Can people still get that, the first one?
The first one's out of print.
I guess that's a no.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've heard that it's like $150 on Amazon or something. It's like, good luck with that.
Go to eBay now. You can get a couple copies.
Wait for the second edition. It'll be better.
Okay. All right, last question. What scene ethics do you hold on to this day?
Okay, so this is sort of an interesting one. Respect for experience. I think this is something that's been lost as the scene grew and grew and grew. When I first came around, New York hardcore scene, there weren't that many of us. All right. Like, I mean, it was the 80s. You're still at CB's. It's not like CB's was sold out every week. What does CB's hold? Like 500 people. So like, there's a handful of people, and everybody sort of like, it was still in a way where like, if you were coming around, you started to recognize everyone every week and you'd see people. In the hardcore scene in the 80s, there was definitely sort of a hierarchy of sorts, not an official hierarchy, but there was a sense that you should respect the opinions of people, or that the opinions of people who had, quote, been around had weight to them versus some of the newer people who maybe were telling you or what they believed about our community or our scene. And so often you would hear people defer to someone by saying, I don't know, man, that guy's been around. And everyone knew what that meant. That meant he'd been going to shows longer than you. That means something, that his experience means something, that his experience with the culture means something, that perhaps they were even part of the invention of our culture, and that, you should respect that. You shouldn't just come in and try to think that your way is better, or like hardcore is going to evolve no matter what you do, but we should continue to listen to the voices that came before us. That's something that I think I have taken into a variety of different places into my life, not the least of which I think about is queer culture, because I think there's in queer culture, there's been, first of all, there was a whole generation of men that were literally decimated by AIDS in the 80s and 90s. We lost a generation of people. At this point, if there are people that are older than us who want to talk about their experiences with being gay, with coming out, with politics and the goals of our community and what we should be fighting for, or what we should care about, or even just practical advice, we should be listening to those people and giving those people amplification of their voices. Because I think we tend to have a very youth-obsessed culture in general across the board. The kids will have their say. Well, cool. I'm down. I'm not saying the kids shouldn't have their say. I'm saying let's listen to what the older people have to say too. And not just because I got older. But I think there's value in that. We absolutely need to be listening to the sort of elders of our respective communities.